Okay, we're all set.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. This is a webinar that's going to be explaining how you can apply for a Community Parent Resource Center grants offered through the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Special Education Programs. The webinar will last approximately an hour, and then you will be, we will be answering many of your questions during this hour about how you can apply for the grants. I'm Carmen Sanchez, and I am the competition manager for this competition, and your contact for many of the questions if you have any follow-up questions to this. As I've mentioned prior to waiting for this to come on, there should be a question tab on the right-hand side. Please, put in your questions into the question pod if you have any questions. I see that we already have some questions about Janice, from Janice about looking for the questions pod, but that's where you put in the questions, Janice. So you'll also notice that there's a pod called Handouts. If you go there, you'll be able to download the PowerPoint to this presentation. We will be recording the presentation, and we will be posting the recording on parentcenterhub.org in the next week or so. So if you want to refer back to this, you can go to parentcenterhub.org. So let me start with moving on to the next slide. So in our agenda, I'm going to be giving you an overview of the CPRC application, tell you a little bit about how your applications will be reviewed, going on about how to submit an application, and then also talk about the resources and assistance. I will also discuss briefly what to expect once you've already submitted the application after April 11th. So let me start by first of all giving you a timeline. Notice that it says the applications have been available since February 29th, 2016. If you're on this webinar, you've downloaded the instructions for the applications, and you know where they can be found at grants.gov. Today is the pre-application webinar, and the deadline for transmittal of applications is April 11th, 2016, and the applications must be received by 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That is the time here in Washington, D.C. time. Notice that there's a seconds on there also. I will be honest with you that if we receive an application at 4:30 and 3 seconds, that will not be found eligible. So it's really, really important that you're aware of the fact it's 4:30 Eastern Time. So if, for example, you're in the West Coast, that means you cannot submit it any later than 1:30 your time. So please be aware of the time here in D.C. and take that into consideration when you're submitting your applications, because the deadline is just something we can't work around that. Anything that's even a second or two late will not be accepted. So I also want to discuss the other issue, and that is there's clear restrictions as to who are the applicants who are eligible to apply for this grant. The only eligible applicants for these grants are local parent organizations. They're the only ones who can apply. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in Section 671 defines what a parent organization is, and it defines it as a private nonprofit organization other than an institution of higher education that has a board of directors, and of that board of directors, the majority must be parents of children with disabilities from ages birth through 26. That board of directors must include also individuals working in the fields of special ed, related services, and early intervention, and individuals with disabilities. And that the parent and professional members that are on that board of directors must be broadly representative of the population to be served, including, if it's appropriate, low-income parents and parents of limited English proficient children. The second part of making an eligible applicant is that that board and that organization must have its mission serving families of children with disabilities who are ages birth through 26 and have the full range of disabilities described in this section. So what that means is you may be a parent organization and meet the first criteria, that you have a board of directors and they're the majority of parents of kids with disabilities. But if your mission is very narrow, for example, your mission is only to serve families of children with autism, or it's only to serve family of children with Down syndrome or other disabilities, that would not make you an eligible applicant. We're very, very clear that you have to serve all families of children with the full range of disabilities as laid out in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. You'll also notice that it says that it has to be a nonprofit other than an institution of higher education. So if you're in a college or university, that's cannot be the organization that applies for this grant. Notice also says that it has a board of directors, the majority of whom are parents of children with disabilities. So we have to know that the majority of your board of directors are from the population to be served. Because it is a local organization for the Community Parent Resource Center grants, and you're defining your community, you must be very clear that your board of directors are representative of the community you wish to serve. So it can't be, for example, if you're going to be serving people in Scranton, Pennsylvania, your board of directors can't be from Philadelphia. They have to be from that community. They have to be representative of the community that you will be serving. So that's very important. It's one of the things that we look for when to determine whether or not an application is eligible to be reviewed. And I'll talk a little bit about what it means if you're not eligible to be reviewed, but I just wanted to really highlight that this is a key element of who are eligible applicants. Eligible applicants can work with institutions of higher education, can work with other organizations, can even subcontract to them, but the applicant themselves have to meet this criteria. Therefore, it's also important that you make it clear in your application that you're an eligible entity, and we can talk a little bit about how you might be able to make that clear. Let me go on to the next slide. So some award information. We are planning to award roughly 30 awards throughout the country. The budgets cannot exceed $100,000 per year. These are going to be 5-year grants, and the project period for these grants, if they could go on the entire 5 years, would be to begin in October 1st of this year, 2016, to September 30th, 2021. Let me also say again that if for any reason your budget adds up to $100,001, you will not also be eligible for this competition. Your budgets cannot go over $100,000. They can go under $100,000 per year, but they cannot go over $100,000 per year. Let me go on to the next slide. So what's the purpose of these CPRC grants? They're meant to be competitive, multi-year grants for up to 5 years that fund nonprofit local parent organizations to provide training and information to families of children with disabilities in the geographically defined communities as required by Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And then also the other purpose is to help youth with disabilities understand their rights and responsibilities under IDEA. Notice again, in defining the purpose of the CPRC grant, we're saying it's to provide training and information to families of children with disabilities. It is not meant to be a direct service provision to children with disability. It is meant to be for their families. The exception to being a direct provision of services is if it's a youth, that means a young person, and the purpose is to teach them to understand their rights and responsibilities under IDEA. So that is really the purpose of these CPRC grants. Notice also geographically defined communities. We do not define what communities the CPRC grants must serve. You must define your community in its geographic limits in your application. You must be very clear as to who you intend to serve and the geographic limits of your area. 7. So what do we expect to come out of these grants? What we say here is that at a minimum, the CPRCs must increase parents' capacity to help their children with disabilities improve their early learning, school-aged, and post-secondary outcomes. So that's your purpose. That's what you're intending to do with these projects. And also to increase youth with disabilities' capacity to be effective self-advocates. Those are the broad purposes of these grants. There was a question, what is the age range for youth? We do not define the age range for youth. You in your application will want to make clear how you will be providing those services to the youth in your catchment area and how you define who the youth will be. And it's the way in which you will be presenting the information and making the argument for what you're doing. There's also another question which seems that the application seems to place equal emphasis on services to youth as it does to families. Is that a misrepresentation? Both of these outcomes have to be addressed in your application. How much weight you give to each of these project outcomes depends on how you structure your project. There is nothing in the application to say that equal amount of resources and effort must go to these two outcomes. You can decide which ones you're going to give greater priority to in addressing these. Okay? Let me go on to the next one. So when you're looking at the application package and it goes on and tells you what you need to put in there, you'll notice that in A, that you have to address the significance of the project. That's the first thing that you'll have to address in your application. We strongly urge you to do the writing and the narrative, and I will discuss that in a little bit also, that you follow the order in which it appears in the application instructions in terms of what you have to address. So first you have to address the significance of the project. That is, you have to answer the question, why is this important? So when you address the significance of the project, you will show how the proposed project will address the needs of parents of children with disabilities who experience significant isolation from available sources of information and support. So this is meant to be to address those families who are most isolated from support and from information in your area. So that's how you would begin to answer this, and you have to make your case for how your project will address the needs of parents who experience the most significant isolation. And the isolation, you have to make the case for why the isolation exists and how you're going to be addressing that. Let me go on to the next one. You need to present appropriate information on the characteristics and the needs of the parents in the identified community. You have to make the case for who your community is, what's its characteristics, who are the parents, what is it that they need, and how you plan to address those needs. You have to present information, you'll notice them too, present appropriate information about the identified community. What kind of a community is it? What kinds of issues do they experience that your project will help families deal with some of those characteristics of the community and where they live in order to provide them with the services, okay? Now, I'm going to go on to project services and activities. I've just sort of highlighted the things that you need to look for in the significance section. There are other parts in the significance section that I strongly urge for you to read carefully in order to determine how you're going to answer that in your application. Part B of the priority lists the requirements for the project services. In general, the services you are providing have to be able to reach underserved populations. By definition, you're saying you want to have a community parent resource center because this particular community, these particular parents are really underserved and they are isolated from available sources of information and resources. So you have to talk about how your services will reach those populations, those families, how your services will increase your parents' knowledge and capacity, how your services will increase the youth knowledge and capacity, how you'll use best practice in delivering services, and lastly, how you'll leverage partnership with others. Now, this is a very sort of overarching way in which I've presented what's in paragraph B. Again, you want to look at them very carefully because Paragraph B lays out what we would like to see in the application and what are the requirements for the services you're going to be provided. The other requirement I want to bring your attention to is that you will need to provide a logic model in your application. And you will need to connect your services and the activities you're proposing to do. You have to connect them to that logic model. You have to make it clear to the reader how the services and activities are connected to the logic model you're proposing. You notice on the bottom of the page a reference where in the actual application you'll find this. Okay? So the focus of the knowledge and capacity building activities that we want you to be aware of, and again, this is all in the application package. I'm just drawing your attention to certain aspects of it. Having parents know their rights and responsibilities, having parents know how to access the general education curriculum and inclusive opportunities for their children, having parents know what are evidence-based education practices that improve their children's early learning, school-age, and post-secondary outcomes, having parents learn about college and career-ready standards and assessments. The parents may want to know about school reform efforts to improve student achievement and increase graduation rates, particularly if they're in communities where graduation is indeed an issue and a big problem, what you can do to help improve that student achievement and graduation rates. How families can use data and parents can use data, either their child data or data about their community. How data will be used by teachers to inform instruction and how they can use data to be engaged in reforming schools and in school reform efforts, how they can use data for advocacy, essentially. The other focus is on youth self-awareness, their rights and their responsibilities, and their ability to be self-advocates also. And lastly, building everyone's abilities, both youth and families, to have skills to work collaboratively and effectively with others, and particularly with school personnel. So again, this is very, very broad, but it gives you an idea of what the focus of these project services and activities should be. I'm going to go on to the next one. Oops. Yep. All right. In paragraph B, C, we then list out what are the requirements for an evaluation plan. Your application has to have an evaluation plan. You have to say how are you going to know that you've done what you've done, what you should have done, and that it's led to the results you wanted. So in the evaluation plan, I want to again draw attention to broadly what we're looking for. You want to include in your evaluation plan how you'll evaluate how well you meet the goals in the logic model, including what kind of methodologies you're going to be using in doing your evaluation. How are you going to evaluate what you do? What are the methods you're going to be doing? The appropriate criteria that you're going to be using for determining if the project has reached and served families and youth in the identified community. And then lastly, how your project will use your evaluation results to examine how you're implementing the services and how you're making progress towards meeting your intended outcomes, your goals for the project. I don't have it in here, but if you will look at the language in the actual application package, it really does talk about making sure that your evaluation activities are appropriate for your project. So you need to, again, connect it with who your audience is, who the families you're serving are, and if these are appropriate evaluation activities for that. It also means that you have to be careful, you have to be using appropriate evaluation activities for the budget. So if you can only have $100,000 a year, you're going to be limited in quite what kind of evaluations you're going to be able to do with that funding. And that's okay, because that would be appropriate for the funding of your project. Okay. The next section, paragraph D, talks about project administration and mostly about the resources of your project. So in this section, what you want to do is you want to say, show how the proposed personnel, the people who are going to be working on the project, have the qualifications and experience to carry out the project, how your applicant will encourage applications for employment from persons who are members of groups that have historically been underrepresented based on many factors, And probably if you're in a community where there's a lot of folks who have historically been underrepresented in a lot of activities, it would mean getting the staff from there. And how you, as the applicant, and your key partners have the adequate resources to carry out the proposed activities. So this is, in this resource section is when you talk about your personnel. You talk about maybe your experiences, the kind of resources you have, the kind of experience your personnel has. So I just wanted to highlight that part too, okay? Paragraph E, there's a question, let me go back to, how do you address the employment issue when you have pre-existing staff? The way you address the management, the personnel issue when you have pre-existing staff is you can talk about what your plans would be to encourage these applications should a staff vacancy occur. You should address it. I think reviewers appreciate your being very straightforward in addressing the issue that you already have pre-identified staff, but you can talk about what your plans would be should something happen and staff move on to other things, or there'll be some staff changes, what you would do to encourage the participation of people from underserved groups. I will also say, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit too, there's a general requirement that you include, that you think about people from underserved groups, and particularly people with disabilities when doing hiring. There's a general requirement, and that can be simply satisfied with checking a box saying that you have equal employment opportunity practices and policies in your organization. That's, to me, the general requirement. When reviewers are looking at your application and they're looking at these resources, it's very helpful to them for you to have a statement of how you will do more than just check off the box, but how you will encourage these kind of applications should a vacancy occur. Okay? And project administration, the last part of it is paragraph E. It talks about what you have to demonstrate, that you have an adequate management plan. That is how you're going to be managing the grant and the money. So you must show how you ensure that the intended outcomes in your logic model will be achieved on time and within the budget, how the time of your key personnel is sufficient to carry out these activities, how you will ensure that the services provided are high quality, how the board of directors will provide appropriate oversight to the project. That's important. How the project will benefit from a diversity of perspectives from lots of different groups, from parents, from other groups in your community. How you'll ensure that the annual performance reports that you will have to submit meet the requirements, and then that you will be using available technical assistance. Okay. There was a question that was submitted prior to the webinar having to do with CPRC measures and how that needs to be addressed in the application. The information that you will find in the application package towards the end of it about the CPRC measures isn't necessarily something that you have to address in your package. It's simply information to tell you that if you should be awarded this grant, you must meet the CPRC requirements. And there will be, if you are awarded this grant, there's a lot of information that's provided about the CPRC requirements to you as you get prepared to write your annual performance report. But you can also go to parentcenterhub.org. That's parentcenterhub.org. And you can put in the search function CPRC, and you can learn about what the CPRC measures are on there. There's some resources available, including a past webinar about what those CPRC measures are, should you want to be familiar with them. But you don't necessarily have to address the CPRC measures in your application. You can if you wish, but it's not a requirement that you address them, other than saying you will meet the CPRC measures should you be funded. So the other requirements, as I stated, is that you have to have a logic model in Appendix A. And we'll talk about what goes in Appendix A and what doesn't. That if you're going to have person loading charts and timelines for your project, that they also be in Appendix A. And any other applicable charts that might be used to illustrate the management plan described in the narrative. And then budget for attendance by the project director at one OSEP meeting in Washington, D.C. annually. So we will be look at your budget to make sure you've filled out that general requirement. If any of these general requirements are not in your application, for example, you don't have a budget for attendance by the project director in your application, it doesn't mean necessarily that your application will not be reviewed. This can be something that can be discussed later in your budget changed, but it's very helpful, and it's a sign of your interest and the seriousness that you include these general requirements throughout. And certainly the logic model, since so much depends on it, it should be in paragraph F. Okay. Okay, Vicki, I'll get back to the question about that in terms of whether or not you have whether or not there should be attachments in the SF242 form later. There is no requirement to answer another question that you attend a regional meeting. It's a very good thing that you budget to attend regional meetings because they're often extremely helpful in carrying out your project, and that could be a source of discussion with your project officer should you be funded in terms of attendance at regional meetings. Let me go on, and I'll try to address these questions as we go on. Okay, so you've submitted your application, and I'll talk about the different parts of the application in just a bit, but how will you be judged? And this is how you will be evaluated. Notice that between significance at 20 points and quality of project services at 40 points, that is the majority of the points. That is over half of the points are in these two sections. That's how they will be valued, and that's how they will be scored by the reviewers. There will be 3 reviewers who will score this. They will be always anonymous to you. You will never know who the reviewers are. And they will score it on the criteria that we have on these, using these points. The project evaluation is the lowest amount, that's 10 points, and then adequacy of resources and quality of the management plan each carry 15 points. And again, this is all laid out very much in the application package. Let me go into some of these sub-criteria so you have a sense of what you have to do, how you will be judged. So for you're required to submit a project narrative in which you will describe how the proposed project will meet the required outcomes. Again, we suggest that you organize your narrative according to the selection criteria, because the requirements in the package follow this selection criteria. So that's a good way of organizing it, because it will make it easier for the readers to know how to score you in each of these selection criteria, because they can see it in your application narrative very quickly. So when you're submitting the application, there's different parts of it. Part 3 is called the application narrative, and that's the part where you talk about addressing the selection criteria used to evaluate the application. This is where you talk about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you'll do it. You are limited to no more than 50 pages in the application narrative. A page is defined as 8.5 by 11 on one side only, with 1-inch margins at top, bottoms, and both sides. You must double space all text in the application narrative, including titles, headings, footnotes, quotations, references, and captions, as well as all text in the charts, tables, figures, and graphs that you include in your application narrative has to be double spaced. You must use a font that's either 12 point or larger and no smaller than 10 pitch, and you must use one of the following fonts: Times New Roman, Courier, Courier New, or Arial. So part 3 of the application package is extremely rigid in terms of formatting. You must stick to it. If you go over 50 pages, if you use much smaller margins, if you have any part of it that's not double spaced, for example, or use very small fonts, or even if you have a footnote in there that's in very, very small fonts, you can be found ineligible, and your application just simply will not be read. So everything in this part has to be, therefore, very much limited to that, no more than 50 pages, and follow this extremely rigidly, okay? But this rigid limits apply only to Part 3. They do not apply to Parts 1, 2, 4, the budgets. They do not apply to the Appendix A. So this is only the part where you're talking about what you're going to be doing, okay? What will go into Appendix A, and we can talk a little bit about that right now. Let me go back to a question that just appeared, just so I can address it quickly and go on. The adequacy of resources section that I've mentioned already, which is Part D. That's where you talk about not only your funds of the CPRC that you're going to be doing with the $100,000, but if you have any other resources in your organization. This is a place to talk about what are the staff you have, what are the resources you might have that don't necessarily supplement, that could supplement or be an additional help to the CPRC project. So yes, in adequacy of resources, you're not limited to talking about only what you would do with the $100,000. You can and should think about how you're going to talk about your organization and the resources your organization brings to bear. Okay, so let me go back to these formatting issues. I thought I had something about Appendix A. I don't. Let me go back. Appendix A is where you put in all the things that cannot logically be double-spaced, but that support the narrative. So the things that cannot be double-spaced but support the narrative are, for example, the logic model. We gave you some information there about where you can find information about logic models. It's almost impossible to do a logic model, and we're using double-spaced and fonts. So your logic model can and should be in Appendix A, because then you have the freedom to organize it and use the fonts, anything you think are applicable to how that logic model is organized. So the logic model should go in Appendix A. The same thing happens when you have personnel loading charts or timelines or anything else that require a different kind of formatting, but to support your management plan and the narrative, that should all go into Appendix A, okay? The other thing that can go into Appendix A, because it supports your narrative, is, for example, a list of your board of directors where you identify which ones are parents, which ones work in special ed, which ones may be people with disabilities themselves. You can put that in Appendix A also, because it is support to your narrative in terms of who the organization is and the kind of resources you have. So that can go into Appendix A. What should not go into Appendix A are letters of support, curriculum, or training, or any kind of things that you might have in terms of showing what kinds of things you do, flyers, all of that. That should not go into Appendix A. That does not really substantially support your application. Okay, that can go in other appendices. You're not limited to having only one Appendix A, and that's it. Having said that you can put in multiple appendices for different reasons, and also saying that aside from Part 3, which is the application narrative, where you're limited to 50 pages, there are no page limits in the rest of it. Having said that, please be very, very aware of the fact that if you have so much, that can be frustrating for reviewers. If you want to point people to other parts in the application, if you want to point people to your logic model, if you want to point people to your management, to other aspects of your management plan, then make it clear in your narrative where they can find it. But be judicious in what else you put in other appendices, okay? And in keeping with being judicious, make sure that your reviewers don't have to scramble too much in order to put together the information, okay? Reviewers, when we provide them with an orientation in terms of their duties, are told they have to read the narrative, they have to read the budget, they have to read Appendix A, and they have to read the abstract. They do not have to read additional appendices. So many of them do read additional appendices. Many of them skim through the appendices and look at letters of support and other factors in the appendices, but they're not required to by the instructions. So like I said, be very judicious in what you put in your Appendix A and what you put in other appendices, and be very smart about how a reviewer and a reader would address that. Okay? Okay. Let me go on to the next one. So when you submit an application, you must submit electronically. Applications cannot be submitted via email. And again, I want to stress again, a second later than 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 second later is considered late, and it will not be read, it will not be processed. Application narrative sections and all the attachments to the application must be uploaded as files in PDF read-only, non-modifiable format. If you try to upload something in Excel, if you try to upload something in Word that you have not first converted to a PDF, it does not get put together into one package. It's empty. It's as if the information doesn't exist. So it's extremely important that each section of this, that you first put them into PDF forms. Again, you must submit electronically. There are exceptions to that, namely, and that's all laid out in the application package, but if you will be applying for an exception to the electronic submission, you must ask for that. You must contact me and ask for that as soon as possible. Otherwise, there's no way we can accept files unless they're submitted electronically. Okay. Let me go on to the next part. You must register early in grants.gov because it may take up to 5 business days to get registered in grants.gov. If you are not a current grantee with this program or with any other program and don't have a registration in sam.gov, which is you need before you can go into grants.gov, you need to be registered in sam.gov first. But you have to start that right now. The minute you get off this phone call, you have to make sure you go into sam.gov and start the process for registering in sam.gov, and then go into registering in grants.gov. Document, keep track of everything that you do when you're registering. But I will say that if your sam.gov registration is not, there's a problem with it, or you were not aware of it and you didn't realize you weren't really registered, and therefore you can't apply and you missed the deadline, that's not, we can't take that as an excuse. It's still, your application will be considered late and will not be read. So the first thing you have to do is go into sam.gov, and please make sure that when you get confirmation from sam.gov that you are indeed in the system before, and then go through the process of going into grants.gov in order to register. And again, make sure you get confirmation you're in the system and you can go into grants.gov and start doing the work. Because it will take 5 or more business days to complete, that's why it's important that you do it now. But it's also important that you submit early. If there's any problem and you're submitting the day or 2 or 3 beforehand, that you have time to get that problem solved in most cases before the deadline approaches. If you're applying at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time and it's due at 4:30, and you therefore you can get it in by 4:30, that's not a good assumption at all. That's not a good assumption at all, because you probably, if anything at all should happen, you're going to be out of luck. So it's really important to start submitting early. You may start submitting with different parts of it to make sure you can get into the system. You don't have to do it all in one fell swoop, but make sure that you try to submit early. So should you encounter any problems, you have an opportunity to call the grants.gov help desk and then get from the grants.gov help desk some support and taking care of it. There's a question here, should you assume if you're currently funded grantee that you're in SAMS.gov? I wouldn't assume it. I would go ahead and check it anyway. Sometimes I know that when we went over from the old system into SAM, there were some people who thought they were in the new system in SAM and they weren't. So it would behoove you all, whether or not you're currently funded, to make sure you're in the SAM system. So please go and check and make sure that you're registered in SAM.gov, even if you're currently funded. Lastly, verify that your submission actually went through, okay? Let me also, the last point I want to make is when you put it into grants.gov, your application, it will sometimes take a little while before grants.gov then transfers it over to G5, which is the system that we use at the Department of Ed. And in that time between having it go and accepted in grants.gov and then going into G5, you may be straddling the time limit. And when it gets into G5, you may be a couple seconds after. So that's another reason why it's really super important to start submitting as early as you can. So be sure you do that because of the problem. Grants.gov will send you an email saying we've accepted your application. G5, I believe also, and I will check on this, but you will get emails confirming that it's been accepted. If you don't get an email saying your application is accepted, that's when you start calling and seeing what happened, because you should be getting an email just like you do when you buy something online confirming that that's happened. Okay? We had a couple of situations last year where people thought they had applied and it never got there. Being registered in G5 is not the same as being registered in grants.gov. They are different systems. So you have to be registered in grants.gov also. Okay? You may be already registered in grants.gov depending on when you last applied, but if you have a clear memory of not applying through electronically but applying for paper way back when, chances are you may not be registered in grants.gov. So yes, you have to start applying in grants.gov as soon as possible. Okay? Applications, again, I'm going to stress this, 1 second after the deadline of 4/11/2016 at 4:30 p.m. Washington, D.C. time, it's late. If the application does not address the published priority, it will not be read. It will not be that would also be ineligible. What I mean by that is you saw that's being required. It's to provide training and information to parent centers. Therefore, if you propose to do, for example, a playground project for your community, that's not addressing the priority. So you may have done everything right, but because the playground isn't what we're trying to fund, that application will also not be read. Applications that are submitted by ineligible entities, that is organizations other than the local nonprofit parent organizations, will not be read. And again, if you exceed the maximum award side of the $100,000 per year, it will not be read. So that means is you've done a lot of work, but there will be no reviewers to put you in. You will not be in the pool of the applications being reviewed and therefore eligible for being funded. You will also not be read if you exceed the page limit in the narrative. So if you're on page 51, you will not be read. If you submit the application in the paper format, unless you've gotten an exception to the electronic submission requirement, it will not be read. Narrative sections and other attachments that are not in read-only, non-modifiable PDF form will not be reviewed. So if you, like I said, if you put something in Word, it does not convert to PDF. Our reviewers are not required to read that, and they won't be able to. They won't see it. So it's there, but they will not be able to see it, and therefore considering it when reviewing your application if you're eligible otherwise. Okay. So you've submitted on April 11th. You've got confirmation from grants.gov and G5 that your application went through at 2:30 Eastern Time, Washington, D.C. time. Everything went in. And again, like I said, you have confirmation. What should you expect once you've already done that? You will not necessarily hear a lot from us. If we're looking, what we will do at OSEP before we send it over to be reviewed by the reviewers who are not employed by the government, but who are experts in the field, what we will do is we'll look to make sure that your organization is eligible for the application, as well as that you met all the other criteria in terms of the budget, in terms of the page limit. If we have a question and it's not clear to us that your organization is eligible for this grant, we will probably get in contact with you and ask you for further information. And then you will, we'll provide it. So it's really important that you be as clear as possible in your application that you are an eligible organization and how you're an eligible organization, by both pointing out how your board is, who's on your board and how they represent the local community, how they're majority parents, and also what your mission as an organization is to make sure it's in keeping with this mission. If your application, even though it's gone through, if it's late, you'll be told it's late, and then you'll know it's ineligible. But even if it's late or it's ineligible for any other reason, you will get a letter from us sooner rather than later saying your application was ineligible, and your application will not be reviewed by the review panel. Okay. In the letter will tell you why, the reasons for the ineligibility. The eligibility decisions cannot be appealed, and only eligible applications will move forward to review. So if you have an eligible application and you made it crystal clear how your organization is eligible, and you don't get a letter saying your application was ineligible for whatever reasons, you will likely hear nothing for a relatively long time. That's okay. As long as you have confirmation it went in and you hear nothing, chances are it's just moving through the cycle of being reviewed. The other thing I want to mention is, on occasion, people submit duplicate applications. They've hit the submit button, they went in 2 days early, and then all of a sudden they realized, I forgot something and I need to do something. They submit the application again with the missing piece. Each of those applications will get a separate number, and you will be told what your number is. You will then get a letter saying that your first application is ineligible, because what we do is we take the very last application that was submitted, and that's the eligible one. You will be told the first one is ineligible, but that doesn't mean that the last application you submitted is ineligible. It's probably still eligible. So that sometimes happens, and I just wanted to be clear about that too. So the funding decisions will be based on several issues. They will be based on a review by an external panel of experts. We also do an internal risk review about your organization, and we go through multiple levels of approval. Once we know which of the 30 that we intend to fund, your congressman has the right to notify you first. So what we do is we send over a list of who we intend to fund over to their respective congressional offices, and then congressional offices have anywhere between 3 to 5 business days to get in contact with the organization and contact people who will be funded to let them know that they will be funded. So in that period of time, nobody can say anything because it's their right to notify you first. Some Congress folks do that. They're very happy to get in contact with their constituents and send good news. Some Congress people get that but don't contact people. That's just up to them. But we cannot say anything until that period of time has passed. Once that period of time has passed, somebody from OSEP either me or who your project officer would be will contact you by phone to congratulate those who are getting funded. After that, everybody will get a letter. Every eligible applicant's application that was read, the applicants will receive a letter, and with the letter they will also get the reviewer scores and comments. Made anonymous, you'll know who they are, but you will get the full reviewer scores and the comments. So that's what you can expect after a period of time. Let me go on to the next page. The process for going through this from when you submit on April 11th to when you find out yay or nay on your application is unpredictable and it's long. And for you as applicants, it probably seems even longer. We cannot predict how long that will take in order to go through all these steps. We cannot give you any information about whether or not you'll be funded prior to the end of congressional notification. So you could call anyone here, you can call even your congressman or whatever, until they're in congressional notification for the congressman or after it ends for us, we cannot tell you anything. So it's frustrating, I know, but that's just the way it works. No one other than us knows the application status until we're in congressional notification period, and then the Congress folks know. It's unlikely if your application is found eligible, you will hear anything before late June. So it's important to consider the fact that you're not getting a letter saying your application is not eligible, that's good news. It's maybe going through, but no news is no news. You won't know for a while. It's important to be patient and breathe as much as possible because, like I said, it's a very long process. You're encouraged to contact me if you have further questions. I have some other questions I got through email that I'm going to address right now. But you're encouraged to contact me if you have further questions, and I can provide you with any kind of assistance. To obtain the application in an accessible format, you can contact the ED's Grants and Contract Services team, which you have the number there. And for problems submitting an application through grants.gov, please don't call me. I can't help you. You need to contact the grants.gov support desk, and you need to get a support desk case number and keep a record of it, okay? So it's important that you track and get a case number and keep this in case there should be any problems. If you're the one who has an individual problem going into grants.gov, that's usually not a reason for extending the time period or considering late applications eligible. On occasion, there are system-wide outages that we don't predict, and the system goes down, and then that can be the cause for extending the time period. But that, I will tell you, is extremely, extremely rare. So just to keep that in mind. All right. There's a question here, which is what I was going to address, which is what kinds of numbers of references are expected per FER. We don't have any requirements that anybody have references per se about the organization. You can include letters of support. We do not contact folks with quote-unquote references, but the letters of support, especially if they're done well and judiciously, oftentimes the reviewers will read the letters of support. The place to address organizational capacity issues, like how do you talk about your organization experience and capacity, is usually in the resources section. That's when you talk about your organization, because your organizational capacity is a resource. And so that would be under adequacy of resources. Sometimes you can also put it in the significance of the project section. You can also include information about your organization and the kind of capacity you have there too. There are some new regulations having to do with indirect costs. It's up to you whether or not you want to take the 10% de minimis indirect cost rate if you've never had an indirect cost rate with the government. But a lot of those budget problems, as long as you're still within no more than $100,000 per year, can be worked out should you be funded after the funded application. so that can change. Some of the things in the budget can change afterwards. And then some other information that I think I've addressed. Is there a limit to the number of supplementary information attachments you can have? And like I said, no, there is no limits. But again, very, very long applications with all this supplementary information can be frustrating for the readers, and therefore may affect how they see your narrative. So be very judicious in what kind of supplementary information you can include. And I think I've also addressed, do not put logic models and personal learning charts anywhere but in the Appendix A. They do not lend themselves to the strict double spacing requirements. And Appendix A, you are not under those requirements at all. The footnotes, if they're footnotes, they can be double spaced, 12-point type. You can use endnotes. You can, if the endnotes are actually in Part 3, Section 3, they are part of your 50-page limit, and they must also be double spaced in 12-point font. You can conceivably put the endnotes into the appendix. So we don't have any requirements. It's just whatever's actually in the narrative must be double spaced and meet those other requirements. Okay. And again, all these other appendices can be single spaced, can be any other kind of formatting you wish. It's not required. They follow the double spacing. That's only for Part 3, the application narrative. There's a question here too about how many new applications will be granted. Well, everybody, let me clarify, even though we currently have 28 CPRCs, and I'm sure many of them will be reapplying, everybody, all the 30 that we intend to fund will be, all of them will be new, in the sense it will be a new cycle. There is nothing, currently funded CPRCs are competing for this just as much as people who've never been funded for a CPRC. So they're all in the same pool. And so I've answered the question. Right now, it's not really renewal. This is not an automatic renewal. The way it works is that you're funded for a 5-year period, and then you reapply and see what happens with your application, in terms of whether or not you'll be refunded. Okay. Do letters of support have to be in English? No, but I cannot guarantee, if you want them to be read, that the reviewers will be able to read other languages. What other organizations do is that they provide both the original letter and the original language and a translation, and that might be helpful. And again, the letters of support go in appendices, and so be, again, very judicious in terms of how you use them, and do not put letters of support in Appendix A. They're not required to be read, even though, like I said, many reviewers do look at them. Okay. Any other questions? I think right now we're right at 4 o'clock. Wow. I'm going to stay on just a little longer and seeing if there's any other questions. We're sort of using the questions for sort of, Vicki, you forgot my question. Thank you, Vicki. Okay. Okay, let me go back to it. Okay. Okay, so Vicki's question. SF 424 in Part 1 requires congressional district numbers, but the numbers don't fit in the space allotted in the corresponding box. Instructions page 19 states, although this form accepts attachments, that option should not be used. Okay. You can submit as additional, if that form tends to be really problematic and you can't put all of them in, or the best thing to do is put in that box, and that's at 424, because that's the box that we use for congressional notification, to put in the Congress in which your offices for the project and your organization reside in. And then if you're going to be serving other congressional districts, and that's how you're defining your geographic area, you could put an additional piece of paper in, or an additional listing in Appendix A even, or in any of the other appendices saying these are the congressional districts you plan to serve. But the way it works in the Step 424, even though it is about the congressional districts are applicable to this, is it gives them an idea of who to contact, which Congress person, not the senator. I think they contact the senators also. They contact both your Congress and your senator, who to contact in order to be able to contact you if you should be funded. Okay. There was another piece in the chat box about okay, the research utilization doesn't link to a doc, but the Settle Rush website overall. This is the research utilization link to the logic models. That probably has changed, and I apologize for that. But I think we give you two links, and you can certainly look at those. And they're only there for your references. You are not required to go and structure your logic model according to the references that we suggest. You can do it any way you choose. So keep that in mind too. Okay, I'm going to keep on going down to the, see if I can see. Okay. Oh, the grant performance measures. Okay. You do not have to refer to the GPRA grant performance measures in your logic model. The statement is there in the application to make it clear that should you be funded, you will be required to address those GPRA performance measures. The language in, I believe it's in E, you could do a, with that PDF of the instructions, you can go straight to where it talks about, talks about it. It's the very end of the Federal Register notice. It tells you in general terms what the GPRA measures are, which are that they be high quality products and services, that they be relevant to the people being served, and that they be useful to the people being served. You can address them in the logic model. You're not required to. You're just required, it's there for your information that you will have to address the GPRA measures should you be funded. If you want more information about GPRA measures, there's a wealth of information about the GPRA measures for the parent program that's available at parentcenterhub.org. That's parentcenterhub.org. And you can go there and put in GPRA GPRA, and they will get you to the last webinar we did in February about GPRA measures, and you can find out about what they are, and if you'd like to put it in there. Okay. All right. I can't. I'm trying to expand this this text box so I can see more instead of little pieces of it. Okay. Okay. There's something here too about authorized rep. I'm looking for it right now. I thought I saw something here about authorized rep. Okay. You will be asked on the form who your authorized rep is. Because you're doing it through, oh, that's what, okay, authorized rep. Who qualifies as the authorized rep to send in the application? Because you're going to be doing it through G5, sometimes you can put in the name of your authorized rep. The authorized rep for these applications and these grants are always the chair of your board of directors. That's your authorized rep. It's the organization that's applying, not the executive director, not the person who will be the project director. So you can often, many places on the form when you're filling it out electronically, you can fill in their names. Sometimes in order to submit the form, you have to put in the name of your, whoever's filling out the form online, and that comes up as the name of the authorized rep. That's okay. Again, should the application be funded, we will then ask to have copies on record of the forms being signed by your authorized rep, your board chair, later should the should this be cited. Okay. This is a question about, I wonder how I can, I'm sorry, this is a new system for me, so I'm not used to seeing it this way. How should data that supports significance be cited? We don't have any requirements that you follow a particular style, format, or like AP style or something if you want to give the reference. We do ask, however, that you double space it in terms of referring to any of that data if it's in your narrative. Be very careful when you do maps in your narrative. Sometimes people forget the maps also, any words in the maps, if they're in the narrative Part 3 section, they also have to be double spaced. So many times if you have maps, it's again, that's an appropriate place to put it in for the Appendix A. Okay, I'm trying to look through these things. Okay. Okay. I don't see any other questions right now. It doesn't look like anybody has oh, I know who asked questions. Okay. Okay. Oh, here's the purpose. Okay, here we go. Does the evaluation plan have to go in the narrative section? You have to, in the narrative section, actually refer, you have to talk about how you're going to be doing the evaluation. But if you have an evaluation plan that's considerably more detailed, or that includes like charts and graphs about, you know, when things will happen and who's responsible for it, that can go into Appendix A. But you must discuss the evaluation plan in Narrative 3 and address those issues. Okay? Okay, I think these are all in alphabetical order by who asked it. Okay. I think I've answered that the age range for the youth, you determine the age range, whatever makes the question make sense. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. We're a little over time, so I think we're going to stop the recording right now. Thank you so much for being on it. Again, feel free to contact me if you have questions about the application itself. But if you have questions about SAM.gov, grants.gov, they're the ones that can help you through it. I don't really have a good grasp about how that is handled through how that works on that end. Let me go back to the end. So thank you again, and I think we're going to stop the recording, and let me know if you have any. Oh, Keith, do you have a question? I saw a hand raised, or was that just a... Okay. Okay. Oh, there's a question here from Kim. There's some other questions coming in after all. Oh, just thank you. Okay. But according to received. Okay. Ann and Keith, I see you have your hands raised. Do you want to get yourself off of mute? Let me see if I can unmute you, Ann. Okay. Keith, you should be unmuted.
No, I don't have a question.
Okay. Ann, I think you're unmuted. Do you have a question? I see your hands raised. Nope. That must be a mistake also. Okay. All right. Let me see if the other ones. Remind you where to find the PowerPoint, please. In the right-hand side in your pod, you'll see handouts and the number 1. Expand that. There's a little plus sign. Expand it, and you'll see this presentation. Kelly, you asked, just confirming if the parent person learning chart is in the application Appendix A. Yes, put that in Appendix A. Don't put that in the body. Okay? Okay, let me see if there's anything else in here. Okay. All right. So I think we've stopped recording a while back. But thank you, everybody. I'm going to now stop showing the screen and get off. And again, if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to send me an email or give me a call. Thanks again. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.